to Amplified. For months now, President Biden's approval ratings have been plummeting. And as of last week, a majority of Americans are not happy with his performance. According to one survey, 51% of respondents disapprove, while 44% give his presidency the thumbs up. This snapshot encompasses all Americans, but what about Black Americans? A closer look reveals a lot. Hit Strategies, a market research firm seeking to empower underrepresented people, has been keeping tabs on trends in the Black community through its Black Track poll, a monthly subscription-based survey, and February's findings are right in line with the rest of the country. No surprise there. We're here to talk about America's persistent discontent with President Biden and the Democratic Party is Terrance Woodbury, a Democratic pollster and CEO and founding partner of Hit Strategies. Terrance, thank you so much for coming back on Amplified. All right, give us a brief overview of February's Black Track poll. Top line it, if you will.
Thank you so much for having me on, Laverne. You know, we've been conducting this poll since 2019. It's to keep a really close pulse on what are the most loyal voters in the Democratic coalition. And what we're finding amongst Black voters is that there has been, in fact, a precipitous decline in their support for Joe Biden from 90%, which is, near Obama level support in January of 2020 when he was first elected, down to just 73%. Now, that 17-point drop is really concentrated amongst younger voters, where his approval rating is just 64% amongst Black voters under the age of 50. And so this points to a real problem as we go into the midterm election cycle, with the most loyal voters beginning to lose confidence as they do not see enough progress on the issues that are most important to them.
Well, Americans, including Democrats, have been unhappy with President Biden and the Democratic Party for months. Does your data tell you anything? Why is that? Does the party have a messaging or a policy issue? Is it both?
That's exactly right, Laverne. I think what we're seeing here in both the polls and in the focus groups are both a messaging and a governing problem. The governing problem that while legislation is being passed and progress is being made, they're not doing a good job connecting the legislation, the resources to the people that need them the most. A voter told me in focus groups just last week that passing legislation is a win for people in Washington. It's a win for politicians. It's not a win for voters until the resources and the interventions of that legislation actually reaches the voters that need them. And the messaging problem that while progress has been made, they are not doing a good job of telling that story. And so in focus groups, we presented a graphic that was how it started versus how it's going. And when you look across all of the most important issues for Black voters, from racism and economy and the COVID-19 crisis, so much progress has been made, and that those dots are not being connected. We call it click here messaging, Laverne. When we needed their votes during the 2020 cycle, we delivered to the palms of their hands. Click here to find out if you're registered. Click here to find your polling location. Click here to request your mail-in ballot. Well, now they need to click here to access the $45 billion in rentals assistance. They need to click here to access the 16 million jobs that were created by the infrastructure bill. And so until we are able to deliver those resources, those programs, and those jobs to the palms of their hands, we're going to continue to see this precipitous decline amongst Black voters.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Terrance, are people paying attention to congressional inaction as well, specifically the legislation that's still on the ropes, like Build Back Better, the George Floyd Act, and the Voting Rights Act?
There's a big divide here. When we look at Black voters, obviously there are gender differences. There's also generational differences, but the biggest difference that we're finding is not amongst age or even geography or demographics. It's those who are paying attention and those who are not. And so amongst Black voters that are paying attention, a lot of our viewers here tonight, they are frustrated with the stagnation in Congress. They are very frustrated with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, these stalwart Democrats. And what I point to as not only the most loyal voters, but when you look at Black seniors, you're also talking about the most likely voters. And so they're paying attention and they're frustrated. But when you look at that other side, the less engaged, that cynical group that we were able to surge in 2020, that we were able to bring into the electorate in 2020, those folks are not paying attention as much. They don't actually care what's happening in Congress. They care what's happening at their kitchen tables. They care about education and their students' schools, and that's the part where we have to start connecting the progress and the resources that are coming out of Washington. Tremendous resources coming out of Washington right now to really help people. And for folks that aren't paying attention, they don't know what Congress has passed or what Congress hasn't passed. All they know is what's happening at their kitchen table and in their households.
Yeah, absolutely. And Terrence, let's also talk about the culture wars because we saw how Republicans were very effective in waging these battles leading up to last November's elections, going after critical race theory, mask and vaccine mandates, policing, those types of things. So, what is the Democratic Party going to do now to counteract the GOP culture war narrative? And more importantly, what should they be doing?
This has become a very active debate amongst Democrats is how to respond to racism as a strategy, as it becomes more clear that Republicans are willing and quite effective at harnessing that racial resentment. That they will that what we saw in 2020, what we saw in Virginia just last year, is that they are willing to yield this and weaponize race and racism. And so I do believe that Democrats have a moral imperative, but also a strategic imperative to take an aggressively anti-racist approach and application to this upcoming election cycle. As the country continues to diversify more rapidly, Democrats' response to overt and explicit racism cannot simply be that we will raise the minimum wage or that we will, create more jobs. We have to create and present an alternative vision of a future of an American future where diversity is in fact our strength. And until they lean into that, this is a part of what we're seeing with this frustration amongst Black voters who, I remind a lot of the Democrats that we work with, the summer of unrest, the summer of 2020, this wasn't the civil rights movement. This wasn't 50 or 60 years ago. The young people that took to the streets in protest after George Floyd's murder in every state, in all 50 states, we saw young people taking to the streets. Those are the voters that are paying attention. And for many of those voters, they are single issue voters, and their single issue is racism. And Democrats are going to have a response to what we're seeing come out of the Republican Party.
And also, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they issued an internal report that warned against the dangers of not being forceful against the GOP's attacks as they engage in virtue signaling. Can you talk about those warnings, Terrence, and how they advise Democrats to fight back on certain issues?
Absolutely. So I was a part of this poll with the DCCC, and in transparency, we are a DCCC pollster. And what they recommend is to take an assertively opposite assertively assert their opposition to some of these racial and culture war issues. But I think that we're going to have to take a different approach here. While it is important for us to declare our support for police, for police as a pillar of the community, for teachers and their right to teach true and accurate history, we Democrats also have to say what they are for and not just what they are against. And I think they can lean into some of these issues where, in fact, there is a majority of support, majority of Americans, not just Democrats, support reforming the police to make them to improve the relationship between police and communities of color. A majority of Americans, not just Democrats, support teachers teaching true and accurate history, including the hard parts of our history. And I believe that if Democrats put forth a message, one that shows that Republicans believe that we are too weak to look into the past, to look into the darkest parts of our history, that we are too weak to embrace differences, but Democrats believe that we are in fact strong enough to look into that darkness, to look into that past, and forge a brighter future, I think that they will attract a diverse coalition that looks a lot more like the rapidly diversifying electorate.
Well, here we are now with the 2022 midterms looming. So, what then should Dems be laser focused on?
Well, we're going to have to walk and chew gum here. You know, it is very important to lean into the economic crises that people are feeling, even though by so many metrics the economy is thriving. The jobs numbers were so impressive just last month, but inflation rates are really making people feel the pinch of this economy. And so, while we are going to have to lean into some of these cultural issues and present an assertively anti-racist message, Democrats are also going to have a response for inflation. And we were just in focus groups last week where Black voters aren't blaming Joe Biden for inflation. In fact, they see it as more of a cyclical occurrence, but they will blame him for not fixing it. They do expect him to have a response for it. And so the clock is ticking because every Democrat on the ballot is going to have to answer to these numbers that we're seeing in our latest Black Track. That while Joe Biden is not on the ballot, his approval rating is certainly on the ballot next to many of the Democrats up and down the ticket.
Yeah, clock is ticking. Thank you so much, Terrance Woodbury, Democratic pollster and co-founder at Hit Strategies. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. Appreciate it.